Our next speaker, Jack Ferris, I think also, speaking of Vienna, going to talk about a mission to Vienna. 44th Bomb Group, Jack Ferris. Volume still good, everybody? Yep. You can hear? Okay, great.
Hey, it's a great day for flying. How'd you like to go to Vienna? You know, I don't see many hands raised.
Why would that be? It's loud, isn't it? Okay. Anyway, what I was saying was it's a great day for flying, and let's all go to Vienna. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Not turn it closer. How about you want to put this
No, closer.
Try that and then just...
I have to learn to talk. So anyway, today we're going to take a trip to Vienna, but we're going to hark back to the first day in February of 1945. One thing I'd like to do is unfortunately we can't all see it, but I have a navigation chart, a chart. This is not a device that we would use to navigate from, but what it will show is the Eastern Front and the Western Front in February of 1945, and I'd like to point out where Chernobyl was, Tureta, the base that we flew out of, the 481st Bomb, and the 451st and the 461st.
You can take the mic with you. Pull it off.
We can't see it all, but if you can visualize, I'll point to Chernobyl and Tureta and Foggia, and this is Vienna, which is about 600 miles away, and a typical flight round trip on that area would be 6 to 8 hours. This depicts the Eastern Front, which separates Czechoslovakia from Hungary, and this is the point that the Russians had advanced to by this period of time. This is the Western Front. This is where our forces were. This is the whole target area of the 15th Air Force. All of these circles that you see depict targets or areas where there would be anti-aircraft guns that it would be best to avoid if you could. I'm going to read about this. Was the 147th mission that the 15th Air Force flew on the 1st of February. 27 aircraft with 5 early returns dropped 18 tons of bombs with 1 loss and 10 casualties. A maximum effort mission was planned to attack this #1 priority target in the 15th Air Force operating area. The Air Force was attempting to cripple the gasoline production, primarily in order to keep the German fighters out of action, and the motorized equipment from moving. The target was cloud covered, but 36 tons of bombs were dropped by instruments. The result were unobserved, but later photo reconnaissance showed the target was successfully attacked and bracketed with bombs despite to small size and advanced weather conditions. We were lined up, we were the first unit, the 484th, we were followed by the 451st and then the 461st. We were to come in at 24,000 feet, 451st at 25, and the 461st at 26,000 feet. And it's interesting that those elevations hardly ever changed, no matter what the target was. So you wonder if the intelligence people would think at a point in time that they change our altitude so it wouldn't be so easy that the defenders on the ground, the German Acke, they could always set it at a 24, 25, 26,000 foot level. But our leader on that day was Major Jerry Balfour of the 427th, or the 827th Bomb Squadron. He led the first attack unit. The flight that I was on, the plane that I was on was in the second attack unit. I was at that time a radar navigator. And my pilot was John Howell. Our leader was Merle Yaney. And when Merle taxied out, unfortunately, one of the challenges in B-24 were the nose wheels. And when he turned onto the runway, his nose wheel locked. And unfortunately, they had to haul him off the partition where he was, and we followed him, and then we advanced up to the lead unit in the second attack unit. But we did take off about 8:30. We climbed on course, crossing the Adriatic, and reached our altitude of about 24,000 feet. And it was my responsibility to identify locations on the ground that I could then transfer that information to the navigator so that he could mark it on the chart and direct us further into the target. We reached the target area at Vienna, and our target was identified as Moosburgbaum, which was creating and providing most all of the petroleum for the German forces. There were, in the Vienna area, there were many targets. Moosburgbaum was one of the primarily principal dependent targets. In addition to that, another one was Wiener Neustadt, which we had all phoned to, which was a Messerschmitt factory. And in that factory, even in those days, they were producing about 600 Me-109s a month, which is pretty good production. That's why it was such a strong target, wasn't it, John? You had been there. Well, at about 1:30 is when we were supposed to attack the target, our original plan. We got there about 2:30, and as we turned onto the target, our point of attack, but our angle of attack was about 227 degrees. That was in the southwesterly direction. And we dropped our bombs. by a combination of instruments and the point in the ground. We were full 10/10 undercast. So it was clouds underneath us, and we did not see the target. It was quite readily that I could make out the Danube River, so we were pretty sure that we were in reasonable area of the target when we dropped the bombs. And the flak was very, very intense. At about the moment after we dropped the bombs and we were about to rally, that is, turn left off the target, we had a direct 88 millimeter shell went right through the number 2 engine. Fortunately, it didn't explode. Had it exploded, the whole of the left wing would probably have gone. But it knocked out the number 2 engine, and almost simultaneously, because of flak impact, the number 3 engine went out. So we are essentially trying to keep the aircraft, the pilot was, keep the aircraft in a flying condition. Shortly after that, he realized that we're not going to be able to get back home, and asked for a heading to the area that would have been into Hungary and would have been a safe place for us to be allowed. Between Czechoslovakia and Hungary, and Ryan, you made reference, I think, to the Lake Balaton, which was very evident on my radar screen, and so I gave the pilot a heading of about 135 degrees, east. And we were about 100 miles from that point. And as we were losing altitude, I did pick up Balaton, so we knew that we were safely now approaching semi-friendly territory. In a short term, we were at about 3,500 feet altitude, and the pilot decided it was time to leave the aircraft. So the 3 individuals after the airplane, the waist gunners and the tail gunner, bailed out through the hatch, and those of us in the front of the aircraft bailed out through the bomb bay. The pilot, John Howe, had put the plane on autopilot to endeavor to direct it to some degree out of area that it might not flash in civilian territory. But in any event, that was a hard call. Well, we all got out of the airplane. We all bailed out, and I could count 5 chutes when I was going down. Fortunately, there was a lot of snow on the ground on the 1st of February, and so I landed in a field of about 4 foot of snow and was pretty comfortable. And I gathered up my suit, my shirt, and left that field area, and there was a packed snow path that I walked through. And shortly after that, there was a farmer pulling a sleigh, or a horse was pulling the sleigh that he was in, and he looked at me and he said, Romansky. And I said, no, Amerikansky. So he gave me a wave, and I climbed in the sled and went off, and he took me to his home farm, and had a meal and bedded me down for the night. And the next morning, a Russian officer came, gathered me up, and took me to a town of Pécs, PECS, in Hungary. And eventually, all of the crew gathered together, and we were guests of the Russians. they had, at that time in this town, taken over the local hotel, and it was a facility of rest and recovery for Russian officers. And we spent about 2 weeks there, and then they put us in a bus, and were trying to move us eastward to get us across the Danube River so that they could try to get us home. And in this bus, we toured every potential area that we could get across the river, but all the bridges had been knocked down, so there was no way to. We came to a place of Mohawk, which was on the the north side of the Danube River, and the Russians had set up a area. They had a rope, not a. You get forgetful sometimes, and I am right now. But anyway, they had this area to get supplies across the river. What do you call these things?
Pontoon? A ferry? Pontoon.
Anyway, it wasn't a steel wire, but it was a heavy rope, and on this rope they had boxes that were about 6 foot square and about 3 foot deep. Anyway, and our method, we climbed in the box and went across the river and got to that part of Mohawk in Hungary. Eventually, they put us in a boxcar and a train, and 6 days later they got us to Bucharest. And in Bucharest, Romania, we spent about 2 weeks there. And on the 15th day of March, this is by now, they flew us out of there back to the base. So we went back to our base in Toronto. And we were there. And I flew my next mission on the 7th day of April. And guess where it was? Back to Vienna? Well, not quite, but it was Klagenfurt, which was south of there. And after that mission, I flew 6 more, and the war was over and I came home. But thank you very much.